Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Guy again. I'm here to present for you Chapter 21, Multicultural Assessment, Present Tense and Future Directions. This chapter was drawn to us by Lisa A. Suzuki, Paul J. Meller, and Joseph G. Ponteroto, which I probably murdered his last name. So let's get started. In this chapter, the authors wanted us to understand that there's a lot going on when selecting a test. It's very political and economic at the same time. They identified three groups that have roles in this. The first group is the test development companies. Their bottom line is they want to sell their product. This is why you should buy my product. Hence the graphic that I chose. Obviously, the guy at the top of the mountain there is following capitalism to a T. He's kicking the others off, saying, my test is better. Educational and institutional systems, that's us, folks. That's us. We purchase these things. And when our systems are purchasing tests, we look at the most important thing we look at, how much it is. Because let's face it, systems have a budget. They've got to come in and they can only spend so much to accomplish this much. In the classroom, as teachers, our biggest thing is, can we put it in quick and easy? Because we've got all these standards that have to be covered by the end of the year. And the year, even though it doesn't get any shorter, it certainly feels that way because we have more and more piled upon us. So educational and institutional systems, we're looking for a cheap test that's really quick and easy to administer. And that's not fair to the third group, the racial and ethnic communities. They are perhaps the most important stakeholders in this testing because, let's face it, folks, testing as it is biased towards white culture and the white community. It is. It is what it is. We didn't do it. We didn't set it up this way. But that's how it is. And it's our job to address it, to fix it, to make it more equitable. I really enjoyed this chapter. Hopefully you guys will too. Now, our author said that for appropriate assessment procedures, there are four main areas. The first area, assessment purposes. The second area, test content. The third area, alternative assessments and procedures. And then the last area they wanted us to look at was the role of the examiner, which a lot of people understate that last one. All right, assessment purposes. This line, my first bullet there, really stood out to me because I didn't think about it until it was in front of my face. A standard battery of measures used with all is not ethical. It's not. A different culture is going to need a different way to take the test. It would be like assigning an English test to a student who just moved from Mexico and doesn't speak a word of English. That's not a fair test. It's not valid. It's not reliable. That student's going to fail 100 times out of 100. That's the only reliability you're going to get out of it. But we do this. In Georgia, when I send somebody up for testing, it doesn't matter who they are. They're given the ITBS and they're given the COGAT. And then once those results are looked at and scored, then we worry about looking at the GRE the GES-3, or looking at some other motivation or the Torrance creativity test or things like that. Only after we've looked at the ITBS and the COGAT, and that's unbending. I have had success with getting my gifted teacher at my school to use the Naglieri, which I feel is more culturally sensitive. It's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than anything else we have right now. But I had to ask for it. And the only reason I knew to ask for it was because I knew about the test, and the average classroom teacher doesn't. Next, only techniques and measures that show clear benefit to the person testing should be used. That's pretty deep. If this test isn't going to help the person taking it, then there's no reason to take it. The examinee and all that have a stake in the results need to know the purpose of the test, the procedures involved in the test, and the possible ramifications of not doing well or doing incredibly well on the test. Assessment practices need to be related to goals and values of the larger society and the objectives of the local community. Now, this one took a second for it to set in with me, but it kind of makes sense because most people, when they leave school, they don't go, I'm going to move to another area. Most people stay where they are. So wouldn't you want their education to be able to assist that local community? Because looking even at my hometown is 179 people even today. It's 1 square mile big. It's called Whigham, Georgia. The only claim to fame this town has is once a year in January they have Rattlesnake Roundup. And it's an arts and crafts festival along with venomous snakes. Strangest thing you'll ever hear of. But out of my friends and my peers that grew up in that town, I'm one of 3 to escape. Let set in, because there was about 26 or 27 of us that constantly hung out together. We constantly went camping and hunting and fishing, and only 3 of us left that area. The rest of them are still there in that town that has about 100, and I'll even give them, maybe they have 200 now. But they're still there. So once I thought about that, it really set in that these assessment practices definitely need to be related to the goals and values and the objectives of that local community, because these students are going to go out into that community and contribute. Test content. All tests, verbal and nonverbal, contain some degree of cultural specificity. And I murdered that word, but in other words, they're biased in some way. Cultural specific instruments. The reading brought up the Black Intelligence Test. It brought up ethnic norming and things like that, which I'll get into in a second. But it talked about how having a test that was specific to a culture could have a benefit. Because it can provide with information regarding a person's behavior within cultural contexts. And however, testing generally gravitates to instruments that allow for the comparison across groups. In other words, I don't expect to see many cultural specific instruments, other than the ones we already have, which are white cultural specific. Ethnic norming. Ethnic norming is where instead of taking a norm of the whole group, you take a norm of your subgroups. The only problem with ethnic norming is that it does not provide info as to why the individual performed how they did, and it does not affect the performance of any individual on a future test. Translation of measures. Now, this one, I kind of have a not so popular view on it. I do not believe that we should translate tests into other languages in very rare occasions. But this one, it talks about back translation is the preferred method, the preferred procedure. In other words, you make the test and then you translate it after. Translation, though, has its problems. And it's one of the reasons that I disagree with it. It's a minor reason I disagree with it, but it's one of the reasons in that every culture takes a different meaning from different things. I wish I could give you an example that was appropriate, but I can't. But every culture looks at things differently. Translation cannot carry meaning differences across languages. It just can't. So if I translate this test, this student might read it, start blushing because I translated it to something that means something inappropriate for him. perfectly acceptable for the United States. Next up, alternative methods. Guidelines should be established regarding general assessment procedures with the individual, community, and professionals. Completely agree with this statement. Everyone has a stake in this test, so everyone should be involved. Professionals and individuals should be involved in determining how they will be assessed or assessing. I agree. Professionals should build a rapport with the examinee during testing. Now, that's not always possible, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here. With testing going to fully online methods, it's kind of hard to do that. Because even when I signed up for a UGA, I had to take the Miller's Analogy test. I went into a room, sat down with a computer, and it was me and the computer. That was all there was to the Miller's Analogy test. There was no one administering the exam except for the computer, and that's where we're headed with standardized testing. Professionals should note motivation of the student, strategies that they used, and frustration tolerance limits. And all of these should assist with and be factored into the results. They should all be looked at. So if this student all of a sudden frustration killed them and they quit on question 30, that needs to be factored into the results. Results should be freely shared and openly addressed in a manner that is easy for the examinee to read or understand. The role of the examiner. The examiner must self-monitor their own level of expertise in examining minority members. How good are you at giving a test to an African American student or to a Hispanic student? And the things that you need to look at are the extent of culture and community knowledge, the level of competence with the test that is used, your strengths. Are they individual strengths, or do you have team building strengths? Are they domain specific, or are they systematic and encompassing the whole of the environment? All right, future directions. Well, for the future, we need to look at developing alternative measures that can be used with diverse populations. Limitations of current procedures. We need to acknowledge the limitations of current procedures in regards to minorities. And no decision should ever be based on a single source of information. We do need to understand ethnic norms. We need to look at culturally reframing these assessments. Cultural reframing, excuse me. Cultural reframing simply means that we need to look at the way that each minority group is going to attack this problem. What is there going to be their go-to? We need to increase collaboration with bilingual and bicultural professionals. This was a no-brainer, folks. People that live in two cultures or know two languages and the nuances of both are going to have a better understanding than people that just live in one. They are more likely to be aware of subtle nuances of a particular group, and they can serve as bridges to our understanding of how things that we do as teachers affect a group. All right, future directions part 2. Developing a broader conceptual framework for the practice of psychological assessment. We need training that is infused with racial procedures. How do you administer a test to a person of this race? Increasing literature and research. That's a no-brainer again. And finally, increasing racial ethnic community involvement in the assessment process. This is the hardest part. We need to get these people in to assist us in any way that they can. Folks, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Hopefully you picked up a few things. If you'll take a look, now that you've watched the video, you can see where I posted my questions. Please take your time. I will respond to you as quickly as I humanly can. Thank you again, and good evening.